1994 saw the original Doom start arriving on home consoles. This expanded the reach of the franchise and brought Doom into the homes of many people who didn't own their own personal computers. As 1995 rolled in, the franchise was still white hot and riding high on the back of the release of Doom 2. This game made GT Interactive and its software a lot of money, and they had no intention of halting that gravy train. Super Nintendo got its own port of Doom in September 1995, showcasing that Doom could turn up anywhere if there was a desire to make it happen. So of course, when Sony, the new kid on the gaming block, crashed onto the scene in late 1994, it seemed inevitable that Doom would find its way to the console. Gamers wouldn't have to wait all that long for that to become a reality. Doom was a game that could push PlayStation to its limits and showcase its gaming chops. Many of the console ports released so far had to be trimmed down and compromised compared to the original release, but PlayStation Doom would be different. It would not only bring the original Doom experience to consoles, it would bring Doom 2 to the party as well, for the first time. This is the story of Doom on PlayStation 1. In the post-Japanese economic boom, Sony emerged as one of the strongest companies in the country. It had its hand in many industries, and by the start of the 1980s was viewed as one of the biggest Japanese brands worldwide. Sony as a company though had no interest in joining the gaming industry. To many of Sony's upper executives, video game consoles were viewed as toys and beneath what Sony wanted to offer. That didn't stop Ken Kutaragi, a Sony executive who developed an interest in working within the video game space. Seeing his daughter play on Nintendo's Famicom convinced him to strike up a working relationship with Nintendo, and he worked on making that happen. The first fruit of this would be Sony providing the SPC 700 sound processor for the upcoming Super Famicom console. Kutaragi had not cleared this with his bosses though, and was almost fired over the entire situation, until Sony realised it could be hugely lucrative. In 1988, Nintendo and Sony deepened their working relationship, with Nintendo contracting Sony to develop a CD add-on for the upcoming Super Nintendo console. This add-on was titled PlayStation, or SNES CD. The idea was to follow the Famicom computer disk system and allow for added capabilities and functionality down the road. Sony though had a growing interest in getting involved in the video game market and began developing their own SNES compatible Sony branded console. The idea was that this new platform would use Sony's SuperDiscs and they would retain sole international rights to every SuperDisc game, giving them a huge say in the platform. This partnership developed all the way through to 1991, where the partnership was set to be officially unveiled at the Consumer Electronics Show. However, Nintendo's president at the time, Hiroshi Yamauchi, was not happy with the terms of that 1988 contract, as it basically gave Sony control over all games under the SNES CD-ROM umbrella. He assembled a team and went behind Sony's back to work out an agreement with Sony's bitter rivals, Philips, allowing Nintendo to keep all the rights to the games produced while getting that CD add-on that Nintendo craved. Sony actually learned of these meetings days before CES, yet opted to still unveil the partnership on stage to the world. The very next day though, Nintendo officials stepped onto stage and announced they'd be partnering with Philips instead, not Sony. That 1988 deal was dead in the water to them. Astonishingly, even after this betrayal, Sony was still trying to negotiate with Nintendo over an SNES flavoured Sony console until May of 1992. But this betrayal ran deep. Sony's executives were furious at the embarrassment this caused. In an attempt to try and get back at Nintendo, they tried to work up a partnership with Sega. Sega of America CEO Tom Kalinske tried to make this happen, however he was met with furious rebuttal by Sega of Japan, who apparently stated during a meeting, "That's a stupid idea. Sony doesn't know how to make hardware. They don't know how to make software either. Why would we want to do this?" It also didn't help that this entire situation had made Sony's executives very cold on the idea of entering the video game industry. They were scorned by the embarrassment that Nintendo had caused. Kutaragi was allowed to continue working on his CD-ROM based console, but it was not considered a priority at Sony. Eventually he had to take his team to Sony Music Entertainment Japan in order to keep the project alive. It was during the time at Sony Music Entertainment Japan that the PlayStation project really came to life. The PlayStation division was officially born in 1993 with the formation of Sony Computer Entertainment (SCE), and in October 1993 the announcement of Sony's arrival into the video game space was made to the wider public. Around the same time, Sony acquired UK-based developer Psygnosis for $48 million, and this would prove to be a key moment for the PlayStation. Ian Hetherington, co-founder of the UK company, was highly critical of the early PlayStation builds, describing them as not fit for purpose. Psygnosis would not only help with the development of PlayStation, they'd also help to develop dev kits that weren't insanely expensive. Sony had zero experience with video games or their hardware, and it was arguably this partnership that pushed the PlayStation into what it became. Sony also managed to get a number of third-party developers and publishers on board. Many were tired at this point by Nintendo's rigorous requirements and iron grip of their platform. The likes of Namco were keen to get their arcade games into people's homes, and PlayStation was viewed as the best platform to achieve that. It's important to note as well that Sony was not a first-party game developer. They were relying entirely on third-party offerings during the launch period for their console. This flew in the face of how things usually worked. Nintendo and Sega were very keen to get their own games onto their own platforms. With the power of Sony's marketing team and a huge budget, PlayStation 1 launched in Japan in December 1994 to huge success. By the end of 1994, the console had already sold 300,000 units in Japan, and word of the PlayStation had Western gamers very excited for its launch there. In 1995, this hype caused Sega to panic and attempted to preempt the US launch of the PlayStation at E3 1995 by launching the Sega Saturn on the spot at E3, in a moment that lives in gaming infamy. This upset not only gamers who found themselves not ready to buy a Saturn, but developers who were simply not ready to launch their games at that point. It also upset Sega's retail partners, who were outright furious. US toy chain KB Toys refused to stock the console because of the surprise launch. They felt strong-armed by Sega and underprepared. When PlayStation launched 5 months later, it sold more in 2 days than the Saturn had sold in 5 months in the North American market. By early 1996, the PlayStation had generated over $2 billion in revenue and became the cool console for kids. Sega Saturn failed miserably to keep up, while Nintendo 64 struggled to break out when it launched in 1996. Everyone wanted a PlayStation, and every game developer was clamoring to get their games onto the platform. In the years after the console's launch, there would be various revisions to the PlayStation hardware. New models and new iterations would be released over the years to take advantage of the PlayStation's capabilities more. Its successor console would be launched at the back end of 2000, the PlayStation 2. As of 2012, the PlayStation 1 had sold a reported 102 million units, with over 4,000 games developed for the system during its lifespan. Not long after Doom was released in December 1993, id Software's Jay Wilbur received a call from his longtime friend, Byron Cook. Byron was a co-founder of TradeWest, a video game company established in 1985 that focused on bringing arcade games to the home console and making coin-op games. In early 1994, TradeWest was bought out by Midway and rebranded to Williams Entertainment Inc., later Midway Home Entertainment in 1996. After this merger, Byron found himself as a business manager at the newly birthed Williams Entertainment. Byron was looking for business opportunities for the new company and hit up his old friend Jay Wilbur at id Software over the potential of working on Doom. Wilbur recalls this conversation stating, "I recounted our experience with Nintendo and Wolf 3D, and Byron set out to pave a path to make it happen." Once the dust had settled on that buyout, a meeting was arranged. Romero and Wilbur made the 2-hour journey down Highway 45 to Midway's headquarters. John Romero and the team at id Software had high respect for Midway and were keen to work with the company. Romero commented about Midway in 2020. "Midway had been around for decades. We respected Midway. Other companies that worked on Doom ports, we didn't know them that well, but Midway was known as a quality company back then." During that meeting, Romero and Wilbur met with various producers of Midway. They also met Adam Sealer, a self-confessed Doom fan who was overjoyed to be meeting Romero. The intention of the meeting was to iron out a deal for Doom on Ultra 64, however Nintendo had not yet released the final specs for that console. Byron suggested that in the meantime, his team at Williams could work on ports of Doom and Doom 2 for the upcoming PlayStation console. Adam Sealer explained this in an interview with Shack News, stating, "The PSX version was a 2-for-1 byproduct of the N64 deal, and served as a development base for the research and development tech and tools that we would need to bring up for the N64, which was not anywhere close to specs or silicone. All the N64's capabilities were wild guessing." Sealer got to work on developing the base for this PS1 Doom port, moving temporarily into the id Software offices and working directly under John Carmack. This allowed Carmack to not only teach Sealer about Doom's source code, it also allowed him to learn about 3D graphics. I learned 3D and the graphics pipeline from John. The PSX version was the harder technical challenge, compared to Nintendo 64. The PlayStation 1 could not run the Doom engine unmodified, it required work to be done. The biggest issue facing the project was that the PlayStation 1 lacked support for perspective corrective texture mapping. This is the process by which the console orientates images and objects in the game so that they grow larger as the player approaches them. He developed a perspective correct raterizer for the PS1 version that was similar to the PC original to overcome this shortcoming. The other big goal was to get the game running at a high frame rate, a necessity for everyone involved in the project. Sealer used a hybrid of the original Doom source code and Carmack's Jaguar Doom code as the base for this version of Doom. He also created the writing tools and editors that Midway's designers would use to modify the levels and create their own. As a proof of concept, Aaron mocked up an E1M1 map that he showed off to John Carmack. He was thoroughly unimpressed with the results. Carmack felt that the PlayStation hardware could be pushed harder and wanted to see Sealer be more ambitious. He wanted this version to differentiate itself from what came before. It was here where Sealer stumbled upon the idea of introducing sector lighting and colour depth, as well as alpha blending that would allow for translucent textures, something the PC version did not feature. He made updates to his tools and passed these along to the team at Williams, who promptly got to work on modifying the base levels. In no time at all, E1M1 was brought up to standard with these new features, and the team at id Software, as well as John Carmack, were very impressed by what they saw. Romero stated that the team at Williams were given huge creative license over the content of PlayStation Doom, saying, "We decided that because we trusted Midway, we wanted them to do their own thing. That's why they had the freedom to add coloured lighting, add whole new soundtrack, just do what they could with Doom to make the PlayStation version more special than the other versions, which were straight ports from the PC. Even the Jaguar version, which we did in-house, we didn't do anything special with it. We just wanted to make sure they ran as fast as the Jaguar's chips could allow. For PlayStation, we decided to give Midway creative license. They did a really great job on the audio and level design. We were very happy with it." Animated skyboxes were brought into the mix, and the team made the decision to ditch the original Doom's episodic format, instead delivering one continuous outing that would see all of Doom 1's episodes play back to back. The team had to remove some of the levels due to the complexity of the geometry, but added in a few of their own for the player to play through. Controversially, the team also decided to cut the Nightmare difficulty, believing it was too difficult and unfair for their console port. Instead, they made the decision to bring in Doom 2 monsters into the Doom 1 experience, on the Ultra Violence difficulty. For the first time, veteran players could face off against chain gunners, pain elementals and more in the original Doom levels, a feat that had not been attempted up to this point in the official games. The team also introduced a new monster in the form of the Nightmare Spectre, an enemy that saw the original Spectre's health doubled and inflicted more damage. Other Pinky sprites took advantage of the translucent textures to give them more visual flair. One area where PlayStation Doom vastly departs from its PC counterpart is the music. Because of the deal inked between Bobby Prince, composer for the original Doom and Doom 2, and id Software, any remixes of his music tracks or sounds used in the game would result in royalties being paid directly to Bobby Prince himself. This also extended to the sounds being used in the game. Midway weren't game for this, so opted instead to create their own bank of sounds. The soundtrack would be composed by Aubrey Hodges, one of the studio's composers. He was tasked with recreating the feel of Doom soundtracks, however the PlayStation's hardware limited what he could actually achieve in that sense. So instead he opted to go for a moodier, darker tone. He outlines this during his 2020 interview with Jake the Voice Parr, stating,
"And so I thought it would be a better proposition to try and make something really work that immersed you into the game rather than just set outside the game to try and pump up your emotions. I felt like I could do it diegetically by making it feel as if the sound you were hearing was emanating from the game itself, like you were listening in on that world of crazy cacophony of madness, right? That's kind of what it would sound like if you were really there."
The game would also make use of PlayStation's connectivity hardware to allow for link-up play between consoles. Local multiplayer would not be present in this version, however players could play cooperatively or in deathmatch across multiple consoles. With the team at id Software very happy with the results and Williams very pleased with what they'd achieved, the game was released in November 1995 to the North American market, published once again by GT Interactive. Doom on PlayStation 1 is a very interesting beast. It offers a 2-for-1 package, bringing console players more Ultimate Doom levels than in any other console version released before this one, but it also brought Doom 2, which up to this point had never been released onto consoles. Not only this, it does a number of things that no other version of Doom had attempted beforehand, and hasn't attempted since. PS1 Doom shoots for atmosphere in a way that few other games dare to try. Doom is a game that prided itself on blistering speed and a soundtrack that thumped the adrenaline up to 11. In PS1 Doom, that is not the vibe at all. Doom on PlayStation is a more lonely, surreal experience, the world around ThatNukemGuy shrouded in mystery and bathed in coloured lighting. The music not rocking the world but instead terrifying and haunting in its execution. And that's the big difference between this experience and the experience of other console versions, as well as the PC original. This is not John Romero's Doom, but it is still Doom. It was a very bold move on the part of the team at Williams. While not changing the core gameplay, they shifted the lean of Doom into a more horror aesthetic and effectively changed the overall experience. Everything around that remains the same though. It's the same levels, the same enemies, the same weapons. This is still at its core very much still Doom and very much wanting to deliver that same satisfying gameplay loop. But the changes cut deep, and that's why some people simply do not like this version of Doom. PlayStation 1 Doom has coloured sectors which are implemented on a sector by sector basis. This lends a lot of the game's levels an incredibly unique and diverse vibe, which wasn't present or possible in any of the other versions. Whether you like that or not is very dependent on how much you like the way it's implemented. It's clear that the use of this is very much down to interpretation of the person editing the level. Sometimes the colours fit in seamlessly. Green toxic sludges glow a healthy green. The candles of the world light up with their respective colours and spread that into the room they illuminate. The outside areas of hell are even bathed with a light ambience that makes the skybox flames practically leap off the screen. Yet there are times when it also doesn't feel quite as natural. Sometimes rooms are bathed in deep reds and dark blues. This can be slightly obstructive to seeing what's going on. One of the bigger critiques I've seen levelled against this version is that sometimes it can be way too dark, and I've experienced this myself. Playing on modern LCD screens in particular seems to cause this issue to flare up, but there are times when rooms feel a bit too dark and the difficulty isn't from the monsters but the over-generous implementation of those coloured sectors. I personally love their inclusion, and I feel that they add a real fresh lease of life to the levels that were previously a bit bland. Most of the time the additions are considered and help to add depth to the spaces within the levels. It's not the most revolutionary thing, but it's transformative enough within Doom that it makes spotting a PS1 version of Doom from a bank of screenshots very easy. But here's the killer, there's no way to turn it off in the game. Because the coloured sectors can't be turned off, it means you either have to love it or you have to leave it. It's one of those creative changes that can absolutely ruin the experience if you're not digging the vibe. The music is also one of the biggest shifts between versions. Aubrey Hodges crafted some intense and very atmospheric music which completely alters the perception of these levels. It's one of those weird situations where abstract and avant-garde work in a mainstream video game. The music feels more grounded, haunting, and feels like something ripped from a horror movie. There's very little here reminiscent of the original game. Even the game sounds themselves feel familiar enough, but are very different when you actually listen to them. I don't feel it's fair to compare the original music to this, as I feel the two are shooting for completely different goals. What I will say is that PS1 Doom's levels feel richer and are more atmospheric from the additions that Hodges makes to the soundtrack. Whereas Bobby Prince's original soundtrack feels more gamey, in a good way. The original tracks are there to push the player, whereas I feel the PS1 music pushes the level and the world more. It also might feel like a cop-out, but to me, both of these soundtracks complement Doom in different ways and add to the overall experience. It's a testament to the work of Bobby Prince and Hodges that these very alternate takes on the Doom soundtracks can stick the landing so well. If you want me to be completely honest, I slightly prefer the atmospheric tones of the PS1 version. I find the ambient soundtrack is more fitting in the empty spaces and the halls of hell. For me personally, I love the PC original soundtrack, but there's just something about the PS1 soundtrack that really sticks with me all these years later. In terms of gameplay though, it's still very much the same Doom experience as you'd expect it. The enemies sound a bit different, but they are all present and correct. Well, bar the Archvile, who is not included in the Doom 2 levels. It's a sadder mission for sure, one that the game manages to get past, but it is a slight disappointment nonetheless. Unfortunately, Doom landed in a time before DualShock analog controls were a thing, so controls on a PS1 controller are handled by the D-pad and the various buttons. It's not the absolute worst experience. The buttons can be fully configured and the default layout is pretty well considered. The issue of course is that the D-pad will never be as satisfying as a fully realised analog stick or keyboard and mouse. The game doesn't make use of the PlayStation mouse at all, which is a very odd choice when its follow-up game, Final Doom, actually did make use of it, and I feel that its implementation here would have been interesting. Strafing is handled by the L1 and R1 buttons, and I personally feel they do the job well. It does take a bit of getting used to, but once you've adapted to the situation, the game pretty much plays as you'd hope. I find combat in this version to be fun and engaging. The controls are not a major issue in this regard. Performance in this version is also pretty solid on PlayStation 1 hardware. The Doom 1 section of the game runs better than any of the previously released console versions, delivering consistently close to 30 frames per second. The game is smooth to play, fun to control, and manages to deliver a great experience. Part of the reason for that is that they use the Jaguar levels, which cut down on resources and geometry. It's an understandable move, but a slightly disappointing one, as I feel that the PlayStation 1 would have been able to handle the original PC levels here. But then again, saying that with the benefits of 30 years of hindsight is a bit silly for me. Doom 2 does test the PS1 a bit more though. Its levels are largely the same as their PC counterparts, and this adds a lot of strain to the overall experience. It's not bad by any means, but when the enemy count begins climbing and the levels get big, things can get a touch choppy in terms of gameplay. It's still very playable and arguably more playable than even the best of what Jaguar has to offer. It all needs to be taken in context. The overall experience is a pleasant one, and PlayStation gamers would have been excited and delighted by what they were given here in terms of performance. Doom 1 and Doom 2 running on a home console at the end of 1995, it sounds like witchcraft. The game features 59 levels, a solid split of Doom 1, Doom 2 and Jaguar outings, with some custom levels thrown into the mix. A great touch is the inclusion of Ultimate Doom levels from Thy Flesh Consumed. Only a handful of these levels are included due to their size, however their inclusion makes this the first time console players could experience any of these levels on a console. Larger Doom 2 levels like Downtown are omitted completely, a blessing in my opinion. As well as Downtown, there are levels like Gotcha and The Living End which don't make the cut. The final boss level is also absent from Doom 2, instead using a specifically crafted outing. The team at Williams also designed and created their own levels which have been sprinkled into the overall experience. I personally consider these levels to be among the best in the entire package, with Twilight Descends and Threshold of Pain easily being two of the best outings in the entire package. It's hard to complain with the sheer quantity of content on offer here when this version comes packing more than double the levels of previous offerings. All of these levels can be played in cooperative and deathmatch play as well. One of the big unique features of this version of Doom is the inclusion of Doom 2 enemies across the original Doom game. This lends returning players a unique opportunity to experience what it's like to fight the likes of Revenants and Pain Elementals in Knee Deep in the Dead. Personally, I think this is a great feature, and it's a shame that it hasn't been repeated on future console versions. It makes for a very shocking experience the first time you play through these levels. I feel the removal of the Nightmare difficulty is what it is. I don't particularly play Nightmare difficulty, and I don't think many people on PlayStation 1 would have enjoyed the experience either, so its absence doesn't really bother me. The inclusion of the Nightmare Spectre as a new enemy also spices up several encounters. It's nice that the team went the extra mile to include new enemies where possible. But for all the praise I can give this version, it does make some odd choices across the board. The biggest one that's always struck me, the decision to omit memory card saves is odd, and while the password system does an admirable job of letting players continue from where they approximately were, it doesn't match what would have been a more ideal solution. I get not everyone would have owned a memory card in 1995, but it seems like a very strange omission. As mentioned earlier on, I love the implementation of the coloured lighting sectors, however at times I feel the team goes a touch overboard. It makes playing on certain screens, or if you're in a well lit room, a lot more difficult. I feel the option to not include some kind of slider to turn this down or turn it off completely was a bit of a mistake. I also have to say that while the inclusion of link cable functionality is welcome, I feel there was room for some kind of local multiplayer on one console. The PlayStation was well suited to this kind of game, and Doom would have thrived with split screen action, even if the level selection had been limited. I understand hardware limitations were at play here, but I do think this was a big missed opportunity. Doom arrived on PlayStation 1 in November 1995, with its European launch coming a month later in December 1995. The game received praise upon its release from outlets and magazines, many of whom were excited at the prospect of Doom arriving on PlayStation in a more fuller form. UK magazine PlayStation Plus gave this version a 92 out of 100 in its December 95 issue, stating, "I've played Doom to death, having waded through the original and its sequel when they first appeared on PC. I was therefore more than familiar with the PlayStation version, which is essentially an amalgamation of the two, combining some of the best levels from each as well as all the monsters and weapons. The result is arguably the best version of Doom yet. UK magazine Maximum gave the game 5 out of 5 stars in the second edition, however they were slightly critical of the game in their write-up, stating, "A series of minor problems are also present, as the limitation of PlayStation's 3D capabilities become all too apparent. These include a slight wobbling of wall textures when your player is close by, a rather weird flattening effect that means certain levels, the Crusher being the prime example, look very squashed and shallow, and a lack of intricate textures on some of the early levels. Amazingly, this version also suffers from slowdown." While sales figures from the PS1 version of Doom have never been officially released, the game did find its way onto the PlayStation Platinum's collection, a mark that was given to titles that sold over 500,000 units. The game would remain as one of the best first-person shooters on PlayStation 1 throughout the console's lifespan, with many other shooters on the platform taking inspiration from its control scheme. Duke Nukem on PS1 features a doomed control scheme that mimics the Doom control scheme and is arguably the best in that game. To help advertise the game when it released, a single level from Doom 2, The Gauntlet, was included on several demo discs at the end of 1995 and in early 1996. PlayStation Doom in the years since its release has found itself a cult following. Many Doom players have expressed curiosity over PlayStation 1 Doom and the features which it brought to the table. The version has been brought forward thanks to fans who reverse engineered a source port of the game which enhances its features and brings the game to PCs. The levels created for this version of Doom though have never been officially brought to the modern platforms, however they are accessible via the WODs and mods section in Doom 1 plus Doom 2. People have also recreated these levels for use on PC. Williams would go on to use the expertise picked up from developing PS1 Doom in creating Doom 64, with all the key players who worked on PS1 Doom returning to contribute. Williams would also release a version of Final Doom at the end of 1996 for PlayStation 1, a version that has been openly stated from developers on the team at Williams as not a priority. John Romero says on the back of the box that this is the best version of Doom, although in the years since, he has clarified that that was for marketing purposes. He still personally prefers the PC version. Romero did say the team at id Software were very impressed by what Williams had done. With Doom 64, because the PlayStation port was a great job, we decided to let them go all out with Doom 64. PlayStation 1 Doom, in my eyes, is a best of Doom 1 and Doom 2 collection. I view it as a natural evolution of what Doom was on PC. I feel that a lot of the features here make sense within the context of Doom and add a lot to the experience. While it doesn't fundamentally change the Doom experience at its core, it does take that experience in a very different direction, and I personally love the end result. PlayStation 1 Doom is my favourite way to experience Doom because of those unique changes, and I think it's a real shame that it hasn't been brought forward in any official capacity. It means outside of playing this on PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 3, gamers have no way to get their hands on Doom on PlayStation. It's never been made available digitally on any of the PlayStation stores. But I feel this showcases that Doom could be more than outright action, and what it brings to the table is worthy of experience. It has its issues and limitations because of the platform it released upon, but that doesn't stop the overall experience being an excellent one. If you haven't gone out of your way to experience PS1 Doom, I highly recommend doing so. It's an excellent offering and delivers Doom on the console in its final form. PlayStation gamers though weren't done quite yet with Doom as a franchise. Williams had one more offering to bring, but this one would be less polished and raise a lot of discussion points. I'll get to talking about Final Doom on PlayStation 1 soon enough.